thank you all for joining our EU-FairPlay crosstalk today. And it's our honor, and we are very happy to have Professor Uhrqvist to give a talk to introduce his project about games. And as Martina has invited our speaker today, would you like to introduce Professor Uhrqvist to our audience?
Yes, thank you, Skylar, and another warm welcome from my side. Today we have the pleasure of presenting to you Associate Professor Dr. Ola Uhrqvist. I hope I said his somehow correctly, from Linköping University in Sweden. And he's been working in the field of environmental and climate change communication for many years. And he's also started investigating the potential for serious games in that context. And recently he started a new and exciting project on Megagames, which you can compare to basically MMOs, so multiplayer games with a large number of players. And today he will be talking about the potentials of such games for the field of climate change communication and also the potential challenges associated with it. And yeah, without further ado, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Do you see my
yes,
the good part of the screen?
Yes.
So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. And as Martina said, I've been working with this, what we call Megagames, but also other kinds of games for quite a long time now. I realized when I put this slideshow together, and I think it's a really valuable, and it's a tool that has a lot of potential when it comes to understanding very complex relationships that are a part of well, sustainable transformation into a better future, hopefully. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Our thoughts about the ongoing project primarily, but also some experiences from previous projects. And of course, you're welcome to just interrupt me and ask questions as I go along, or save the questions for later if you would prefer that. So let's see if I can change slides. Now it works, I hope.
Yes.
So the first thing then, what we are doing quite shortly, if I put it really short, we explore how mega games can enhance social interaction and learning for sustainability. And the reason for this, at least from my point of view, is that as having quite a lot of experience from gymnasium, upper secondary school, when you talk about sustainability, it usually becomes either very soft and lofty, where you can have everything is possible, but you don't really connect it to the details of the world. Or in the other hand, you're looking too much into the details and then you don't get the big picture. And we hope and think that mega games and playing games together is a way to kind of bridge this divide between the details and the big picture, but also bringing in a lot of different views and perspectives on the topic that we are discussing. So I listed here a few of the games that we have been dealing with, and it goes along the same line of thinking, basically. We started together with the SMHI, the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, who wanted to develop a game about climate adaptation. And they wanted to communicate this in a better way, trying to see the complexity between keeping the economy going in a city, adapting to climate change, keeping people happy and healthy. So you're basically the climate adapter of the city, and you need to take decisions and balance different pros and cons against each other when you do that. But this is a game for quite a few participants, and we wanted to expand this to a broader audience, bringing in more people. So we started to elaborate with something we call the climate change mega game. And why is it a mega game? That I guess that's or the key topic that most people are not that aware of. Martina talked about the multiple player games, massive online games, and basically it has a lot of resemblance. But to keep this short, and I will return to it later when I go more into kind of a bit of more philosophy, trying to define what a mega game is. But for now, I would say it's a lot of participants, between 20, 30 persons at the least, and up to 100. It could be 200-300 players in some games, but we hope to reach 50-60 players. But the main point is that when you bring enough amount of people into a room, you lose control of the game, of the big picture of the game. So you need to talk to other people to know their perspectives, to know their problems and their desires in the game. When you play Monopoly or another game, you can basically see what every other person knows. But in this game, you need to talk to them to understand what they know. So just to give you a short overview of how we tried to develop these games over the last years, we have the climate change mega games where between 20 and 100 persons try to transform a region, the region we happen to live in here around Linköping, into a sustainable region. From there, we moved on and started a course here at Linköping University about designing mega games as a way to learn about sustainability. So we take students, it's a freestanding course, you can apply to it from at least all of Sweden. Because we realized when we created the climate change mega game that maybe we were the one who learned most from designing it. So we wanted to invite other people to have the same experience and think of a problem that they want to create a game and communicate a kind of sustainability issue, create a game that makes this visible and playable. It takes a lot of thinking and learning to do so. So that course is running the third round this year. And then we got money from the energy agency in Sweden for a game that we're working mostly on now, and then I will show you a couple of pictures from it later on, which is switching the current, where you need to transform the energy system to a sustainable one. And where you could easily say that what we expected in year 2020 when we applied for the money and how the energy system of Europe looks like now, basically things that were unthinkable 3 years ago is everyday life now, which is quite interesting to see how quickly things can change, not for the better in this occasion, obviously. And then we are working with a similar game called Changing the Game of Consumption, trying to understand patterns of consumption in different organizations' interests. And we are about to start a new project about we call it melting the polarization, and it's the polarization, of course, in trying to make people talk to each other. And it's about the relationship between urban areas and more less populated areas in Sweden. So there's a lot going on, and I added some pictures on my project teammates. So, but that's what we are, who we are, and what we are doing. I hope it give you some idea of that it's a lot of games going on in my life right now. Good, but why are we doing this? I keep this short because I don't think it comes as a surprise to most of you. It comes from the Swedish situation, but it's basically the same thing in the rest of Europe. And for everyone who has been reading up on sustainability issues, you realize that we're ahead of quite massive social transformation if we want to reach a sustainable world and avoid climate disaster and other things. So I have this image that I really like from one of the newspapers in Sweden. They show, in the big circle, they show how much carbon emissions each person have a year. And in Sweden, it's about 9 tons per person, depending a little bit on how you count. And you can divide up that in investments, you have public consumption, food, transport, living, and so on. And what we have promised, as partly as members of the European Union, but more specifically as the Parliament of Sweden have decided that in 2030 we should be at the little gray circle, and 20 years after that we should be the big circle of red, and other colors should be able to fit in the black one. And this will require huge amounts of transformations of the way we live and organize our society. And what we want to show is that partly what will this transformation take, and what kind of interests clash with each other when it does so, and what kind of cooperations could be possible. So we basically want people to be able to experience how such a transformation can be, and how they can facilitate such a transformation. And we think that games are a good way to do that. And of course, we play in this region. It's about 500,000 inhabitants, very exposed to what's happening in the rest of the world, and trying to build in that into the game. And I will show you a few images here, and hopefully you will get a good idea what the game is about. But to keep it short, how can we visualize this massive and rapid changes that we are expecting in the decades to come? Yes. So here's where you will see a couple of images from our games. This is the first big image is from the first test round of the switching the current game. But what I want to point to in this slide is that we think that it's one thing to know about these changes, but it's also an important competence in sustainability training and education to work together with others, with people with other perspectives. So if we want to reach some kind of just social transformation, we need to develop empathy and understanding for other perspectives. And we need to be able to discuss with people that we don't agree with, or especially when we disagree with people, we need to be able to talk to them in a constructive way. And we think that games can provide a safe space to some extent, where you can try and elaborate and also fail in doing this without any bigger consequences than that you might lose the game. And you will learn and experience something that you hopefully have used for in later in life outside of the gaming world. And in this case, we tried to visualize the energy consumption, the energy production, and how different groups in society relate to energy. Some are producers, some are consumers, some don't even see their role in the energy system when they start, but at the end of the game, they usually understand, the energy system is much broader and much more complex than we thought from the beginning. And I also wanted to show you our game designer, Magnus, who is here dressed as a brutal capitalist, wanting to profit from everyone who's want to buy energy at some point in the game. He doesn't look like that in real life, though. So this is an image of the game. We had the photographer with us for this session. So what you see here is the different roles that we've tried when we want to visualize what the energy system is about. We try to include as many groups as possible. So you will have at the table to the right, you have the populations with different income levels of this region. At the table to the left, you have the energy producers. They produce electricity. Some of them, some others produce district heating and so on. And you also have at the table to the right, but a bit further away, you have the administrations and the politicians who can legislate and do other similar things. And also in the middle, you see me standing trying to moderate the discussions in this group. So what's happening at this exact moment is that you see the man in the white shirt to the right is explaining his experience of being in the position that he is to the others in the room. It's between two rounds of the game. To go a little bit more into detail, you can see that we try to represent as many things as possible. This is from the table of the middle class population, and they have a need to buy goods, to buy food, to transport themselves, to have housing and health and education. That's kind of needs that this population group has. And each of those needs connect them to another group in the game. And what you see here also is that some of the tokens or the small bricks that you find on each on the table, some are green in the middle and some are gray in the middle. And each of the gray ones produce carbon dioxide. So at the end of each turn, you have to collect a couple of carbon dioxide stones, which you see in the middle, the red circle in the middle. And you want to get rid during the game of all these gray areas. So in that way, we include the ecological dimension. But this group needs to balance this turn to becoming more green with the income that they have and the expenditures, because everything costs money, of course. And then you have, if you don't fulfill the needs or change lifestyle in some way or the other, your well-being will go down. So it's in this way we try to balance the social, the ecological, and the economical dimensions of sustainability into kind of a holistic view. There are more details to this, but I just wanted to show you the concrete level of what each player is dealing with. And then each role in the game have their own table. So they need, in order to do something, they need to go and talk to someone at the other tables. And then it looks like this. And I'm really happy to be able to show this image because it looks like if it's staged, stand here, point in different directions and look as if you are talking to each other. But this is actually a real image from how it looks like when people are engaged in the discussions of the game. And I also said that we try to bring in place the region in a bigger narrative. So we introduce, when we find it valuable for the dynamics of the game, we throw in a couple of news flashes from the world. It could be global heat waves, could be economic disasters, it could be beneficial things, the US re-entering the Paris Agreement and so on. Trying to build a narrative around these transformations that the player feel that they're in this historical process as far as we can go. So that's the game in short, how it looks like. It's usually a quite intense and messy experience. But afterwards, the participants tend to say that it gave them quite a lot in understanding how very nested these processes are with each other, and that they really need to collaborate with a lot of different people in order to make change happen. But I also wanted to say something about why we are using Megagames. There's a lot of other kinds of games that could be used. And as you know, since you're working with serious games, everyone here more or less learning through games, I don't need to say so much more about that. We want them, of course, we want them to have fun while playing, but we also primarily want them to learn something. So the goal is, as I said in the beginning, to create an experience of this transformation, have a feeling that we have done this at some point, a little bit like Harry Potter when he's making this spell producing this shield of protection that he has. And he knows that I've already been doing this because I saw someone do it and I realized that that was me. So in similar ways to that, the Patronus spell that he puts, we want to create this feeling that we have tried this and we can do it again somehow. And we want to visualize all the relations and challenges that could become important in this process, and create an arena for training communication between participants. And then if you look to the right, I hope it's to the right when you see it. It's to the right when I see it, at least. This triangle, where we try to place the serious game or the Megagame in the middle between three different kinds of more well-known formats of games. And if I start with the simulation, trying to make something that is as realistic as possible, bringing in as much data as possible. You would find this in games like Civilization, for example, and other civilization building games. SimCity is partly there. You feel that it feels real, but you don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. And we want to, from this side, we want to bring in as much data about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, how much different activities are polluting, and so on into the game. But we also, at the same time, want people to understand what's happening. We want them to see the connections between different parts. If we do this, something happens. And then board games are really good at making visible what is happening. Board games show the mechanics of the game. So we want to bring in that part, and that's why you see all this gray and green bricks, for example, on the table. But the backside of board gaming is that you need to simplify to a level where it hurts when it comes to being really realistic. And people tend to have a fixed idea of board games, that you have a set of rules, you have some winning conditions where you win the game. And we don't really want them to have an idea that the game tells them what it means to win. In our games, both the climate change Megagame and switching the current, there are no winning conditions. Basically, everyone who is in the game agrees that we need to reach 0 carbon emissions by 2045, according to Swedish law. But they have a lot of different ideas about what that really means in practice. It means different things to the rich part of the population, or to the less well-off part of the population, or energy producers, for example. And they need to negotiate some kind of solution. And we don't want to tell them how they win, but they need to become carbon neutral. If they do, everyone wins. But then does some role, are they better off than some other? Well, maybe it's up to them. So that's where the role playing comes into the picture. We want to include the presence, the feeling that you really are this character that you are playing. And we also want the participants to feel free to suggest changes in the rules, to include new things in the game, so that their agency, we should be able to do this. Why couldn't we create a huge natural reserve somewhere? There are no rules for that in the game. Then they come to us as game control, and we say, well, let's figure out a way to include that in the game as we speak, so that it feels as realistic from that point of view as possible. Yes. So, and what we try to do, as you probably understand, we try to stay in the middle of the triangle. We need to bring in small pieces of all these components into the game that we have been creating. Yes, and the next point, I promised to return to why we use Megagame as a concept, we could make it much more simple for ourselves to, like in the climate adaptation game, where there are a few people, you can play it as a solitary game as well. But we wanted to have this mega game to facilitate discussions between people that doesn't really know exactly what the other person's need. So each player, each role needs to formulate, articulate, and make sense of how they understand their situation in, well, in this case, the energy system, and then communicate it to others and try to negotiate solutions where that are quite similar to the real society, in the sense that no one controls the big picture. But we need to create some kind of organization to handle the challenges that we stand in front of. And also I wanted to say something about the geographical scope of the game. It's quite unusual that you work with a region. When you look at serious games, they tend to be at least focusing on one city or one neighborhood or a house somewhere where you try to change light bulbs, reduce your energy consumption, for example. Or you look at a global scale, the UN negotiation games, for example. And all of these, of course, are interesting in their own sake, but we wanted to come to the middle because we see problems in both of them. If you look at the UN negotiation games, they tend to be very far away from most people. You can read up on the interests of China and the US and Sweden and Germany and so on. But it becomes very far away, and you don't really feel as a person as if you can influence those processes. You can understand them far away, but you cannot. It's very difficult to influence them. And then if you look at the most local kind of games, we can switch light bulbs, we can reduce food waste, and we can do other things where we feel that we have a lot of agency, but it doesn't really have any big effects on the societies, if not everyone is doing it at the same time. And we hope that focusing on the region kind of combines those two. The region is large enough to make a difference and to include agriculture, forestry, energy production, different kinds of settlements and so on. But at the same time, you recognize and you can feel what's happening in this region. If someone puts a windmill, for example, somewhere, you can see it with your own eyes. You can kind of experience how would it be if it was standing there. So you have a personal relationship to what's happening in the game. And hopefully, and we think that helps people to connect what they're experiencing in the game with the real life outside of the game. So that's why we stick with this more regional focus, even if it becomes quite difficult sometimes to get data that is relevant for this region. So, and a few words, I see we're approaching half an hour. And of course, we are studying this, trying to understand what's happening. And we do this in a lot of different ways. We have some researchers in the group who are crisis managers. Usually they've been working with kind of ambulances and fire disasters of different kinds. But we also have communication or interaction researchers that look at how the players make sense, how they negotiate, how they talk about the content of the game. So if you see on this image, we are recording everything, as close to everything that we just can to be able to track what's happening in the game. So there are cameras, video cameras and microphones on all tables. And a lot of the participants wear this body cams so that they go around and we can document what they are following them around in the game all through the process. So we have 161 hours of video so far to analyze. And our interaction researcher says that you can write a PhD on between 20 and 40 hours of this kind of material. So it's a huge amount of material that we are gathering. And we're also, of course, asking the participants how they feel, what they feel that they have learned via surveys before and after the game. Trying. So we have been, for 1 year, we were developing the game. Now we've been testing the game for half a year, more or less. And now we're going to dig into the data and see what interesting things we might find in there. But we're also doing, when we are doing this research and an argument for getting the grant that we have, we are using the game as a way to try to map and try to understand different organizations, different actors that are not usually brought to the headlights and to the headlines of newspapers, but to bring in their perspectives as well in the negotiation game that we have created. So we try to visualize as many different social groups as possible and their perspectives on what the energy system really is. And then at the end, we use the game as a mirror where we ask them beforehand, what kind of narrative would you want to be in the game? And then we try to include it. We let them play the game, and then they reflect upon, did this represent how they feel? Do they understand their role in the game or in the energy system better after playing the game? So that we gave them a fair representation. So the final slide, some challenges that I see and that I find very interesting to continue working with in this and the following projects. The first one is that balancing the playability of the game, which means that, of course, you want to bring as few pieces as possible into the game, so it becomes the threshold to get into the game and understand the game is low, but then you want the realism on the other hand, where you brings in more and more pieces. We need to include this one, otherwise it doesn't make sense. We need to bring in something else, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And then at the end, it becomes too complicated for the players. So we always balance, how can we make it as complex as possible without losing the playability of the game. So that's one thing that we're working on. Another thing is that players tend to be very truthful to the rules, what they experience to be the rules of the game. And what they don't understand in this case is that there are really few rules in the game. We're sometimes only making them up as we go. And we want them to be creative and say, it would be reasonable for my role to do this. And see the rules as a tool that helps them to drive this narrative of transformation forward, but not as something that stops them from doing interesting things in this game world. So that's something that is really difficult. And I think that represents something that is really difficult also in the real life. We tend to go along in the same direction as we think that we should do, and we need to start learning to think outside of the box. Then it's as you can realize, there's a lot of information going on back and forward in the game, and keeping track of that and keeping kind of this game with 8 to 10 different roles with 3 players in each. Keep everything together is quite a challenging task that we're thinking about how to do. And there, one thing that we are considering is to make it more hybrid, so that we want to keep the eye-to-eye discussions, the personal communication, but maybe we could do something to make the game itself more digital, so that you move pieces on a digital board, but you talk to other persons. And the final thing is that, and it goes into the second one, is that we want people to focus more on the narrative. What would it take for this group that I'm representing to transform into a sustainable well, in a sustainable role in a sustainable society, and not think about how do I count the tokens on the table. But maybe that's our problem, that we have created such a complex game, probably. So that's what's going on in my head right now, and what we've been doing for a couple of years. And I hope it makes sense. So I just say that that's what I had for now. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you a lot for the presentation. That's really inspiring. And we see that we have new audiences. If you have any questions to our speaker today, you can unmute yourself and to speak out directly, or you can input your questions into our chat box. Yeah. Anybody has questions? If this is not the case, I would like to start with some questions that I'm really interested in. It's really inspiring to know your mega game and project and how this would facilitate the education for sustainability. That's really inspiring, especially that in your game that you combined the role play, board game, and the simulation. Yeah, and I have some questions about the project. As you are designing this game for facilitate the education so people can understand and learn more about sustainability or climate change. I have a basic question about it. Why do you choose game instead of other education formats? How do you understand the advantage of game?
It's a very important question. And the thing that the reason why I think the game is also valuable, not saying that other kinds of education is wrong, but the reason why games are valuable is that you're invited into a small world that where these complex relationships that you find in sustainability issues and other issues as well, they become visible, and you kind of involve yourself. Compared to listening to a lecture, you step into this world of transformation, and you need to solve the different problems that you find. You need to, when you need to change your food, your unsustainable food that you're eating, to something else, you start to see, if the game is well designed, you see that, okay, then it will have effects on my economy, and it will have effects not only on me, but on the producers of food, and it will have, you can see how the effects of your choices spread through this small society that we create in the gaming world. And of course, someone could tell you that, but it would be information that you forget quite soon. But when you've seen it and when you've experienced it, it stays longer, and it gives more food for reflection about especially about the complexity and that other persons are really involved. When you need to talk to them, it becomes something different. Even if they're playing a role, it becomes something different than if you just hear that, well, if everyone becomes vegetarian, all the meat producing farmers would run out of business. Mm-hmm. But if you have this conversation with someone who's representing the meat producing farmers, then it becomes something different.
Yeah.
But ideally, I would say that you use the game to kind of get the feeling of how it's to be inside, and then you use it to inform more traditional kinds of education, when you really learn about, okay, so how does it look like in real life? Because of course the game will always be a simplification.
Thank you for elaborating on the advantage and impact of game. And related to the mission of our EU-FairPlay project, we are also interested in the equity gap problem in education. For example, in the case that climate change and sustainability education is getting more and more important in education, but it seems that the education in game formats or traditional formats are not inclusive enough. It means that maybe not all the people have equal access to this kind of knowledge that you want to introduce to people. Do you think game can be an effective way to address this problem in education?
I think there are two very different kinds of answers to to this good question. And the first one is that I think that, and it comes from, there's a lot of studies showing that when you let groups of students play games, for example, the climate adaptation game that we created, we published a paper on it, saying, and it's just one of many, saying that a lot of students that usually find school quite boring and uninteresting can see another meaning when they play games. So they tend to appreciate that kind of teaching. So I think that games have a benefit in the sense that it can reach out to other groups that are usually not as easily impressed by educational initiatives than other groups. So I think it's really good in that sense. And I also think it provides a space where you can, it becomes more of a trial and error than sitting and listening and giving the exact correct answer to something. It needs, though, to be, if you want people to learn from the game, you need to have a very good debriefing at the end, because you give them an experience in the game. You might increase their interest in a topic through the game, but you need to show, as a teacher, you need to show how this is relevant and how this connects to the real world. If you just play the game and you go and do something else, you would lose half of the learning potential from the game. I couldn't, of course, half is just an estimate, but you lose a lot of the learning potential. On the other hand, the other way to respond to your question is that kind of the game that we are working with, it's very time consuming from us. It takes a lot of teacher resources. So in that sense, there's a risk that only a few groups of students will be able to test this game or other similar games. So in that sense, there's a risk that it becomes a teaching method for a small group of students. And then, of course, you lose the fairness part of the game. So it's two different ways. Yes, it has the potential to include more, but the format itself, being time consuming, has the risk of excluding people at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. That's indeed some advantage and disadvantage for using the game. And it's really necessary to balance its advantage with the risk and put this in mind. Yeah. So as an open-ended question to the issue that you have mentioned, with the equity problem in education, we want to have the education more inclusive. That include people of different genders and nationalities from different socioeconomic backgrounds and different education levels. In this case, you have mentioned there is a risk that game can increase the gap, actually. Are there any possible solutions that you can think of that maybe we can make it more benefiting instead of increasing the gap?
That was an open-ended question indeed. It's
yeah.
Yes. Well, the standard answer is usually that, of course, the education system needs more resources to be able to facilitate this kind of education. And but working with the system that we have, what I think we can, maybe two things that we could do as game designers and other game designers. Of course, the game that we're creating, we will give away for free at the end. It's a research thing. We want as many people as possible to play it, but there's a lot of time if there's a group of teachers who want to use it, it takes quite many hours to learn the game good enough to be able to use it in teaching. So one thing could be to find ways to kind of train teachers in using games so that they feel much more relaxed in doing so. So that's one thing that I hope can be better in the future, because now it's quite a few teachers are willing to start on a more advanced kind of game. A lot of people would be happy to put these small games, learning games, in the hands of their students. And sometimes it works. Sometimes, as I said before, if you don't, I think you always need the teacher to be there in order to embed the game in a broader learning context. If you just let the kids play games, it will be more play than learning. And I've seen that in the climate adaptation game that we have been using. Sometimes we've been arranging it as a role play for a class of students where they have different roles. And sometimes we let them play by themselves. And when they play by themselves, they don't really, or some care very much, but a lot of them just rush through the game without really thinking. It's kind of a fun extra thing that we are doing besides the real studies. And I think you need the teacher there to explain why they are doing this game and following it up with a discussion so that they really learn. And I think teachers need to be aware of that so that they use the game, whatever game they want to include in their teaching, in a more constructive.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Indeed, the awareness of the impact of game on education, I think it's not that very common in the teacher education. So I think by empowering teachers or facilitators of the game, we can be more confident in using the game and to make it more accessible to all the learners. I think that's a very important input, and a possible solution to address this equity gap in education with the teacher education. Thank you. Are there any other questions from our audience? So the goal for our crosstalk is also to stimulate the conversation for people from different disciplines. And as Ola has mentioned, although he is a very experienced game designer, but we do need many more educators and practitioners so we can be more confident in using the game in our education and to ensure also the mission of EU-FairPlay project. If you have any questions, maybe directly related to Ola's presentation or from other backgrounds, feel free to raise your questions.
Maybe I have a question. I would like to know how long is this game, how long does this game needs to be played? Maybe 1 hour or 2 or 1 day or 2 days? I have no idea how long this game
it's good.
Lasts. Yeah,
good point. I forgot to say it's a quite big game, so it's an intensive 1 day event.
One day.
Usually
Okay.
we play between 9 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, maybe. So it's 6-7 hours of gaming. People are quite exhausted.
Yeah, that's
at the end.
really intense. Yeah.
But I could, yeah. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah. No, thank you. I was. Please continue.
Yeah.
So we usually play it in rounds where we play 5 or 10 years each round. So we make kind of leaps in time from 2020 or 23 now that we move it, so that we start in the present and then end somewhere in 2053 or whatever. But I think one thing connected to the previous question, how we can make games more inclusive. I think that at least when it comes to sustainability education, as I think we should see that it becomes sustainability education when we combine economy, the social and the ecological dimensions, so that we really see how they connect, not that we're just reading about them in different settings, but really see how they connect and how the interplay between those. And in that sense, well, in many cases, teachers tend to be biologists, social science teachers, or economic teachers that feel that are not really confident in talking about. If you're a social science teacher, you're not really confident in bringing in too much biology and ecology into your teaching. But having a game that could be a way to bring teachers from different that are not in the same way as bringing subjects together. You bring teachers together that are not really used to talk to each other and cooperate, and they can play the game and then also learn about how things are connected. And by doing that, they would increase the quality level of their sustainability education in a way that they couldn't do each of them by themselves. So it could be an entry point to collaborations in sustainability education.
Thank you. Yeah, that's getting more diverse and inclusive for people with different knowledge and background. Yeah. And a follow-up question to Richard's question about how long is the game. You mentioned that the scope of your game as the mega game, and I wonder how many players are usually involved in one session of game.
If we exclude the real test round where we had 15 players, I think, we usually manage to gather somewhere between 25 and 35 people. Our aim is to go higher than that, but it's a lot of things that needs to work in order to bring so many people together. Hopefully in autumn we will have a play at the gymnasium school, and then we will have somewhere between 60 and 100 participants.
Yeah, and I've seen in your photos mainly adults players are involved in the game. And are these players the main target audience, or do you have other target audience in mind?
Since the games we are designing right now are quite complex, the target audience that we have is from age 15, 16, maybe, and upwards. So if you want to participate and play and are 15, that would work. If you bring it into a classroom with 15-year-olds where half are interested and engaged and the other half is not, then probably it would fail. So the younger the people are, the more engaged they need to be, the more interested they need to be. But mainly our target audience is an interesting general public.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
very looking forward to when it's more open to the general public. we can also introduce your project and see maybe there are also other network partners in our EU-FairPlay current network. Then let's see if we can apply and test the game. Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you a lot.
We could come down and bring the research team and come down to Germany and see what we can do.
Yeah, wonderful. We have many partners in Germany and also other partners across the whole Europe countries. That would be nice to connect to other people. And for our audience today, we have 2 events this year. One is in August and the other one is in October. The first one is aligned with the early conference in Thessaloniki, and the other one is aligned with the European conference of game-based learning. If you are interested in joining our network event, or if you have any proposal to host one session of our network meeting, then feel free to contact us and then we can arrange the invitation. And of course, this is also something that we would like to invite Professor Ola Uhrqvist to see if you are able to join one of our events.
That would be great. I hope I can find time in the schedule.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from the audience? If this is not the case, thank you very much for giving us the presentation, introduce the project. It was very nice to know your project. And I hope that this can stimulate a conversation for the partners in our network meeting. And we look forward to continue the conversation in the future with you.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. Nice to see you all and good luck with the meeting.
Thank you.